Hey there. Tonight, I want to sit with you in the part of history that never made it into paintings. Forget the bright banners and polished crowns. Forget the neat stories where everything has a moral and the ending is clean. The truth was darker. Softer in the telling, yes, but darker all the same. Because in a world like this, people did things they didn't sing about. They boiled the same bone until it forgot it was ever meat. They watched swollen knots rise under a neighbour's skin, warm and tender, like the body trying to bloom into something it could not survive. They ate bread that tasted faintly of bark and winter, and they pretended it was still bread. If you find a strange kind of peace in this quiet darkness, leave a like, subscribe, only if it genuinely helps you unwind. Nothing forced, nothing loud. Just a small sign, like a candle in a window, that you were here with me for a moment. Now, lower the lights if you can. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench without you even noticing it happen. Take a slow breath in, and then let it fall out of you like warmth, leaving a stone somewhere nearby in our imagined room. The fire makes that soft, steady crackle, the kind that doesn't demand your attention, only keeps you company. And we'll begin at the edge of the map. Not the edge where oceans fall away or dragons curl round the ink. The real edge, the one made of silence and mud and ordinary people whose names were never written down. Picture a village that doesn't have a name anymore. It might have had one once, spoken with pride in a dialect that sounded different, 2 valleys away. But the name has faded, the way footsteps fade when rain keeps coming. It sits in a shallow fold of land, a soft crease between low hills, hidden just enough that no important road bothers to pass through. No stone marker announces it. No bright flag flaps above it. If you held a map, you wouldn't see it, and you don't have a map. I always feel a little odd when I imagine that. A life lived without ever seeing a drawn line that says, here is where you are. You only know your world by walking it, by counting the trees you pass on the way to the well, by the way the ground changes under your feet from packed dirt to softer, wetter earth that pulls at your soles. In this place, the world ends where the trees begin. The forest is not a backdrop, it is a presence, thick, patient, dark even at noon in certain patches, where branches knit together and the air smells like mushrooms and wet bark. The trees stand close, and the shadows between them look deep enough to swallow sound. Sometimes you hear a bird call from inside, sharp and sudden, and the whole village seems to pause for half a heartbeat, as if listening to see whether the woods are speaking back. The fields spread out in uneven patches, not neat rectangles, but shapes that follow the land's grudging willingness to be worked. A strip of brown earth here, a corner of green there, rows that don't quite line up because no one measured them with anything more precise than a tired glance and a memory. The soil is turned until it's exhausted, then turned again. The work never finishes. It only stops when the light fails. Somewhere north, people say, there is a river. You haven't seen it. You've heard about it the way you've heard about saints' bones and distant wars, in the same tone, half awe, half disbelief. The river is a rumour that carries fish and danger and the idea of travel. It might as well be a different world. This is where you were born. This is where you will probably die. Maybe 60 steps from one to the other. The houses are low and slumped, as if the wind has leaned on them for too many winters in a row and they have never fully pushed back. Walls are a careful weave of sticks, packed with mud and straw and whatever else people can press into the gaps. When the sun dries, it cracks appear like little rivers. When the rain comes, the cracks soften and swell. The walls breathe with the seasons, bulging slightly in damp months, shrinking and hardening in cold ones. You learn where the drafts slip in and how to stuff them with an old rag. The roofs are thatch, and they sag under their own weight. At first, fresh thatch looks almost golden, almost pretty, in a way that makes you suspicious. Pretty things in this life don't last. Then time comes, then storms, Birds pull at the straw for nests. Rain finds a way, because rain always does. There is always at least one leak in a place you can't quite reach, so you keep a bucket there, or a pot, or a hollowed-out wooden bowl. Some nights you fall asleep to the patient sound of dripping, drip, drip, like a slow clock that only measures discomfort. The village smells like wet wool and smoke and earth. There's a sour edge of animals, a damp sweetness of manure, a trace of old stew clinging to the air around doorways. None of it surprises you anymore. It is the smell of being alive here. It settles into your clothes, into your hair, into the folds of blankets that never fully dry. The road that leads in is not really a road. It's a muddy track with 2 deep grooves worn by ox carts, always filled with water when it rains, always sticky when it doesn't. In spring it becomes a kind of soup that tries to keep your boots. In summer it dries into rutted hard lines that catch your toes when you're tired and not lifting your feet enough. In winter the grooves freeze and shine, and you step carefully, because a fall can break more than pride. A broken wrist means no work, and no work means hunger, and hunger means choices you don't want to name. No one important travels here. If a stranger arrives, it becomes the story of the week, sometimes the month. Where did they come from? Why do they smell different? Do they bring disease? Do they bring trouble? The arrival of someone new is both fascinating and mildly terrifying, like seeing a storm gather on the horizon when you still have laundry out. Most days pass quietly. A distant bell might mark the hours from another village's chapel if the wind carries the sound just right. If not, time is measured by shadows, by the way the sunlight moves across the floor, by the ache in your spine that settles in before noon, by the way your hands start to shake when you've been gripping a tool too long. There are maybe a dozen families, enough to fill a small gathering on feast days. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everyone's problems, too, and everyone politely ignores them until it becomes necessary not to. A sick child is everyone's business. A missing chicken is discussed with solemn seriousness. A cracked roof beam becomes a community worry, because one collapse can mean one less pair of hands in the fields, and the fields don't forgive shortages. The elder, if you can call him that, is a man named Tom. Tom once spoke to a monk, just once. He repeats that conversation like a charm, like proof that wisdom can be borrowed if you hold it long enough in your mouth. No one questions it. Tom's hut hasn't collapsed. His goat seems healthy. That is leadership. Here, practical, quiet, and accepted because it has not failed yet. Nothing is precise. There are no written records, no deeds, no surveys. Boundaries are understood in phrases. Past the old elm, where the ground gets soft, near the stone that looks like a sleeping pig. If there is a dispute, it is handled with a shrug, a short argument, and sometimes a loaf of bread passed back and forth until no one wants to keep fighting. People don't have energy for long grudges when winter is always waiting. You've heard of towns, of cities even, places where stone buildings rise 2 stories high, 3, some say, and where the streets are crowded enough that you could brush shoulders with a stranger and never see them again. It sounds impossible. It sounds like the sort of thing people make up to fill long evenings. You can't miss a world you've never seen. Still, sometimes, when you're alone at the edge of the field, you catch yourself staring toward the tree line and wondering what sits beyond it. Then the practical thoughts return. Even if you reach some far place, what would you do there? You don't carry coin. You don't read. You don't know the customs. You don't even know exactly how old you are. Age is not a number here. It is a feeling in your knees when you stand. It is the way your mother looks at you and decides you are old enough to haul water. It is the way your hands already look older than your face. So you stay. There is safety in the familiar, even when the familiar is hard. You know which part of the roof leaks. You know which neighbor might lend you a tool without asking too many questions. You know where the firewood is stacked, where the sheep like to wander, which patch of sky tells you a storm is coming. You wake with the light, You sleep when it fades. You work in between. It isn't much, but it is life, and in the quiet rhythm of it, there is a kind of peace. A peace that doesn't ask big questions. A peace that doesn't require you to understand anything beyond what you can see from the top of the nearest hill. Time here is not a calendar on a wall. It is the sound of geese returning, the first frost that makes the puddles glassy, the way your hands chap and split when winter settles in for real. You count years the way you count scars, without numbers, only with memory. The bad harvest when the rye turned black and bitter, the year the rain wouldn't stop and the beans rotted in the ground, the brief good season when the barley came in thick and heavy, and even old Marjorie, who rarely smiles, smiled for a week. Even news moves slowly. A rumour travels with a cartwheel. It bumps along, picks up dust, loses its sharp edges. By the time it reaches you, a war is already over, a king is already dead, a sickness has already moved on to another valley. You hear it, you shrug, you go back to mending a fence, because fences are real and rumours are air. When night comes, that peace turns physical. It is a low hearth glow in the center of a single room. It is smoke drifting up toward a hole in the roof, never perfectly, always leaving a faint sting in your eyes. It is a pot hanging over coals, holding a stew that never quite ends. Pottage, that eternal grey comfort. You add cabbage when you have it, barley when you can spare it, dried peas, a few leaves. If you are lucky, a scrap of salted fat, just enough to tint the broth and make it taste like something remembered. Bread sits beside it, dense and dark. Rye, barley, oats. Wheat is for people who do not mend their own roofs. Your loaf is heavy. It does not rise much. It crumbles quickly. If you leave it out a day, it hardens into something that could bruise a hand. You break it carefully. Every crumb matters. You sweep crumbs from the table with a reverence you do not speak about, because speaking about it might feel like admitting how close the edge is. Animals breathe in the corner. A cow, if your family is that fortunate, a big warm mass of patience. Chickens tucked into a basket. A goat near the door. Their sounds become part of the night. The soft shuffle of hooves, the occasional sleepy rustle of feathers. It isn't ideal. It isn't clean. It is warm. And threaded through even this warmth is obligation. A man from the manor comes sometimes, the steward. He carries a little book, or a wax tablet, or whatever the Lord's world uses to remember things that peasants are meant to forget. He asks questions. He counts. He writes. You answer carefully, never with too much detail. He doesn't seem to like detail. You've never met the king. You say his name when you pray, just in case it matters. You've never met the Lord either, not properly. You might have seen him on horseback once, a shape moving above you, a shadow with a better cloak. Mostly you know him through the steward's questions and the grain that leaves your hands. And still, the hearth glows. The roof mostly holds. The cottage is warm enough tonight. Tomorrow, the same sun will rise over the same hills. For now, that is enough. Stay with that thought for a moment. Enough, not plenty, not easy, just enough. Let the fire's rhythm fill the silence between us. Let the imagined smell of smoke and damp straw settle into the corners of your mind like dust. And when you're ready, when your breathing has slowed without you forcing it, we'll follow one small path of mud and fear beyond the village, and we'll see why most people never did. Listen closely. Even the quiet has texture here, like wool brushed the wrong way. And if your thoughts wander, let them wander slowly, the way smoke wanders upward, never in a hurry. Not because they lack curiosity, because curiosity doesn't feed a cow. Curiosity doesn't patch a roof. Curiosity doesn't keep you warm when the wind finds its way through every crack. The next morning, the world is the color of damp wool. You step outside, not because you want to, but because the day is already asking for you. The air bites gently at the tip of your nose. It's not dramatic cold, not the kind that makes legends. It's the ordinary cold that lives in shadows, the kind that lingers in the grass and clings to your ankles as you walk. The ground is soft underfoot, and each step makes that quiet suction sound, mud letting go of your boot only because it has to. You know this yard so well you could cross it in the dark, and sometimes, when you're tired enough, you almost do. There is a thin film of ash on the doorstep, grey and powdery. You track it with you without thinking. Your fingers find the latch by habit. Your eyes, still half full of sleep, find shapes before they find details. The fence post that leans, the bucket that always ends up on its side, the chicken that looks at you like it has plans. The well is not far, yet the walk feels longer when the bucket is empty and your hands are already aching from yesterday's work. You can hear the chain before you reach it, a faint metallic whisper that doesn't belong to nature. You smell the damp wood of the well frame, the old moss growing where hands have touched for years. The water below is dark. It reflects the sky like a secret. When you lift the bucket, the rope burns your palm a little through the rough fibers. You shift your grip. You feel the tug in your shoulder. It's strange, isn't it? How a small pain can become so familiar. It feels like part of you, like a second pulse. You carry the water back with careful steps, because a spill is not just a mess. It is time lost, and time lost is energy lost. And energy, here, is a kind of currency you cannot replace. Back home, a child coughs inside the hut, a wet little sound that makes you pause for a heartbeat, because everyone knows what coughing can mean. Sometimes it means nothing. A throat irritated by smoke, a cold that will pass. Sometimes it means a fever by sunset and a candle by midnight. You don't say that out loud. You just set the bucket down and listen a second longer than you should. Then you force yourself to move, because listening does not change the weather. By the time the sun has climbed enough to soften the chill, you are already in the fields. The soil clings to the iron of your tool, heavy and reluctant. Each time you lift and turn, you hear the dull thud, the soft tearing sound of roots giving up. The smell rises, rich and dark, a scent that feels almost holy because it promises life. You breathe it in and feel, for a moment, a calm you didn't know you were missing. Then your back reminds you who you are. A small, sharp note in the spine that grows louder the longer you bend. You straighten slowly, not all at once. If you stand too fast, your vision pinches into black at the edges. You've seen older men fall like that, no drama, just a body deciding it has had enough for the day. Sometimes they get up again, sometimes they don't. The field keeps waiting either way. This is the world you know, a circle drawn in sweat and mud, a handful of miles, a handful of faces, a handful of seasons repeating until you can't remember the first one. People sometimes talk about going beyond that circle. Not often, not casually. It comes up the way people mention storms, or wolves, or the idea of dying far from home. Someone will say, "My cousin's boy went beyond the trees," and everyone will nod as if that sentence explains everything. Because it does. You've heard of the next village over, 5 miles, maybe. And yet, it might as well be a foreign country. You know their gossip without knowing their faces. You know who married who stole a goat, who said the priest snores during Mass. It all drifts across fields and hedgerows like smoke. But travel isn't a pleasant thought. It isn't a fresh adventure. It is an exhausting, possibly fatal kind of movement through a world that does not care if you arrive. Roads are not roads. They are guesses. They are muddy tracks that split and rejoin, that vanish into grass, that detour around fallen trees, that become rivers when it rains and dust when it doesn't. There are no signs, no friendly markers, only vague advice passed from mouth to mouth. Go until you see the leaning pine. then left past the stone that looks like a sleeping pig, then keep walking until the birds change their song. And if you miss the stone, if you misunderstand what leaning means, if your feet carry you a few steps too far before you notice the ground is wrong beneath you, there is no one coming. I always feel a chill when I think about getting lost in a world like that, not the theatrical kind of lost we imagine now, with rescuers and shouted names and bright lanterns. This is the quiet kind, the kind where you step off the path to relieve yourself behind a bush, and when you turn back, the path is not there anymore. It's just grass and shadow and trees that all look the same when you are frightened. Your body could disappear into bracken like smoke, and people wouldn't know you were missing until the next feast day when someone finally asked about you, and someone else just shrugged. That shrug is a kind of grave. So when you think about travel, you think first of the forest. Medieval forests are not parks. They are not romantic. They don't exist to be admired. They exist to be endured. The trees are dense, branches tangled like knuckles. Roots rise from the ground like veins. In places, the canopy is so thick the light becomes green and dim, and your own breathing sounds too loud. The air is wet with old leaves. Your boots, if you have boots, sink into pockets of rot and hidden water. You feel your sock go cold. You keep walking anyway, because stopping doesn't dry anything. There are noises that could be birds, or could be something heavier moving through undergrowth. A snap of a twig, a rustle, a faint scrape that makes the hair on your arms rise, even when the day is mild. Sometimes you tell yourself it is only wind. Sometimes you don't believe yourself. Boars live there, wolves too, depending on the region and the year. People who don't want to be found. That last one is often the worst. Bandits are not storybook villains. They are hunger with hands. They are men who once worked fields and then lost them. Men who were wounded in a lord's war and sent home with nothing but pain. Men who learned that a traveller is softer than the earth and easier to take from than a lord's storehouse. They don't wear matching colours. They don't announce themselves. They look like ordinary men until they stop being ordinary. If you walk with purpose, you might look like you have coin. If you look well fed, you might look like you have something worth stealing. If you are a woman travelling alone, the danger changes shape, becomes quieter and uglier, and no one in the village likes to speak about it directly. They just say, "Don't go," and the words sit heavy in the air. Confidence isn't armour, not out there. Then there is the practical part, the part that keeps you in place even when you are curious. If you travel too far, who tends your field? Who feeds the animals? Who mends the fence when the storm knocks it down? What if the Lord's steward comes to collect while you're gone? You cannot explain absence to a man holding a ledger. A ledger does not care about stories. It cares about numbers, about grain counted in sacks, about eggs counted in tens, about labour owed in days. The village runs on being seen, on being present, on being predictable. Even if you did reach another village, what then? You aren't expected. You aren't welcomed. Outsiders bring problems, disease, crime, strange ideas. You speak the same language, mostly, but your words sound different at the edges. You might hold your spoon wrong. You might make the sign of the cross a fraction differently. That can be enough to make people stare. Beds are already full. Food is already scarce. Hospitality is not a wide open door. It is a narrow crack, offered carefully, because everyone is calculating what they can afford. So most people stay home, not because home is safe. Home leaks, home burns, home starves. They stay because home is known. You know which roof beam creaks when someone stands too close. You know which chicken wanders too far. You know which neighbour will lend you a tool and which will demand half a loaf in exchange. You know where the cold comes in and how to block it with an old sack. Out there, no one owes you anything, not even an explanation. Once, you almost try. It isn't a grand decision. It starts as a thought while you watch the sky change colors at dusk. In the morning you tuck a heel of bread into cloth, step onto the track, and follow it until the huts behind you shrink into low shapes. The air changes near the trees, cooler, greener, damp. Your ears notice things they normally ignore. A crow calling once, then silent. The scuttle of something small in leaves. Your own breath sounding too close. You reach the first shadow under the branches and stop. Just stop. You think of your field, your mother's face, the steward's quiet eyes. You think of how easy it would be to become a story. He went beyond the trees. So you turn around, slowly, as if you are not chasing fear, only choosing sense. By midday you are back where you began, and the village looks the same, and you feel grateful for that. Still, people do travel, sometimes. Not peasants, usually. Merchants, monks, messengers, people with protection or a purpose, or both. You might see them once or twice a year, coming through with carts that smell of wool, salted fish, damp leather. The cart wheels groan like tired animals. The horse's breath steams in the air. The travellers' cloaks are dusted with road dirt, and their hands look different from yours, less stained by soil, more marked by rope and coin. They carry stories the way they carry goods, cities of stone, streets that don't turn to soup when it rains, they claim. Markets where spices exist, not as legend, but as something you can hold between your fingers and smell like faraway warmth. Buildings so tall they make you dizzy to look at. Churches that shine with glass. People who can read words on a page and make meaning appear like magic. You listen. You want to believe. You also don't, because believing too hard hurts. Sometimes a traveller mentions sickness, not the great one, not yet, but a fever in another town, a swelling in the neck, a cough that rattled a whole household. The traveller says it with a careful tone, and you feel the village lean inward like a flock sensing a hawk. People step back just a little. They don't say why. They don't need to. When someone new arrives, you don't just see a stranger. You see the invisible things they might carry. Fleas in their seams, illness in their breath, bad luck in the shape of their shadow. It isn't only superstition. It is experience. Hard-earned knowledge that the world is full of tiny threats you can't bargain with. Later, when the traveller leaves, the village exhales. Life folds back into its usual shape. The same pot warms on the hearth. The same bread is cut into careful pieces. The same chores return, one after another, like beads sliding through fingers. And you, if you are honest with yourself, feel relief. Relief that you did not go. Relief that the forest remains a boundary and not a path. Relief that the world beyond the trees stays theoretical, because theory is safer than mud under your feet when you have no idea where you're stepping. As the sun lowers, shadows stretch across the fields like long, dark hands. The wind shifts, bringing the smell of the wood. The birds quiet. Somewhere, a dog barks once and stops, as if it remembered that barking costs energy. You walk back toward your hut slowly. You feel the weight of the day in your shoulders. You feel the warmth you will soon find in the low glow of the hearth. You think about how small your world is. And in that smallness, there is a tired kind of comfort. The village is enough. It has gossip and conflict and weather and sickness and fleeting joys. It has the rhythm of survival. It has the quiet pride of making it through one more day without vanishing into the green dark of the forest. And when you lie down later, on straw that pricks through thin fabric, sharing the room with breathing bodies and animals that shuffle in their sleep, you may hear, far away, a sound like a distant bell, or maybe it's only wind. Either way, your eyes close. The day dissolves. The world shrinks to firelight and breath. and that is how most journeys end here. Not with roads, with sleep. The coals wink softly. Someone sighs. The pot gives a tiny click as it cools. Your thoughts loosen, one by one, and drift away like ash, slowly, steadily. You wake before the fire wakes. It's a peculiar thing, that first moment, when your eyes open and you aren't sure whether you're awake or still inside a dream. The room is dim. The air is cool enough that your breath feels like a small animal leaving your mouth, a soft puff that vanishes immediately. The hearth is a circle of grey ash with a faint red eye buried somewhere deep. You can smell yesterday's smoke on your blanket. You can taste it, too, faintly, like old wood and damp wool. Someone beside you shifts. Straw crackles. A child's heel presses into your calf for a second, then slides away. The cow in the corner exhales, slow and heavy, and the sound is oddly comforting. You know that sound. You've known it for years. It means the animal is still alive, still warm, still yours to borrow milk from, for now. You sit up carefully, not out of gentleness, but out of practice. If you move too fast, the cold bites your joints and your head swims. You plant your feet on the dirt floor, feeling for the spot that is slightly drier, slightly firmer. The ground holds the imprint of 1,000 mornings, packed down by bare soles and worn boots and the dragging of baskets. In winter it stiffens like a crust. In spring it goes soft again, and you learn to live with mud inside your own home. Mud that creeps in like an uninvited guest and refuses to leave. The first job is always the fire. Always. You kneel close enough to feel the chill of ash, close enough that the smell of it fills your nose. Your fingers find a sliver of dry kindling you saved, tucked away from damp, hidden like treasure. You rub it between your thumb and forefinger, and it feels rough, splintery. You think about how absurd it is that warmth depends on such small pieces of wood. How quickly a winter night can turn cruel if the coals go out. A spark, a breath, another breath, slower this time, patient, as if you are teaching the fire how to remember itself. For a moment nothing happens. You wait anyway. Waiting is a skill in this life. Waiting for rain, waiting for seeds to sprout, waiting for sickness to pass, waiting for the steward to stop asking questions. Then the ember catches. A tiny orange glow blooms inside the kindling like a secret being revealed. Smoke curls upward, thin and pale, and you feel that small victory in your chest. It isn't joy, it's relief, the kind that loosens your shoulders by a fraction. As the flame grows, the room changes. Not dramatically, just enough. The cold eases, shadows soften, faces become slightly less ghost-like in the dim. You hear the quiet sounds of waking. A cough, a sigh, a murmured word that doesn't fully become speech. Someone reaches for a cloak. Someone scratches at a flea bite. Life begins again, not with music, but with small discomforts. Your home is not a house the way stories describe houses. It is a compromise. When I picture it, I always notice how low the ceiling feels, how the beams sit close enough that tall people learn to duck without thinking. The wood is rough, cut from trees that grew crooked, shaped by hands with tools that have been used until the metal is tired. You don't mind that nothing is straight. Straight lines are for people who can afford to waste material. Here, you take what the land gives and you argue with it until it becomes shelter. The walls were built the same way you build most things here, with persistence. First the frame, thick posts sunk into earth, then wattle, a weave of flexible branches threaded between uprights. It looks almost like basket work, if baskets were meant to stand against wind. Your hands remember the motion. Bend, tuck, press. Bend, tuck, press. The branches resist, then surrender. They creak softly a sound like joints. Sometimes one snaps and you swear under your breath, quick and quiet, because swearing doesn't fix anything, but it helps the moment pass. Then daub, mud, straw, water, manure, a mixture you slap on with your palms because tools are scarce and hands are reliable. It's cold at first, wet and heavy, and it squishes between your fingers. The smell is earthy and sharp. You press it into gaps, smooth it just enough to pretend you've made something deliberate. You watch it dry in the sun, cracking as it shrinks. Later, you patch those cracks. Later, you patch the patches. If you're honest, the house is always half repaired, always leaning toward decay. It doesn't insult you. It's simply how the world behaves. Everything here is temporary, even when it lasts decades. The roof is thatch, layered straw tied down in thick bundles. Up close it looks like hair, old, sun-bleached hair. Birds pull at it, rain needles through it. In winter the roof carries snow like a heavy blanket. Sometimes you lie awake, listening to the weight settle, wondering if this is the night the beam finally gives up. When it holds, you feel grateful, almost tender toward the structure, like it's a tired animal that chose to keep standing. There is no glass in the windows, only openings covered with shutters that never fit properly. Wind finds every flaw. In summer it brings insects. In winter it brings cold. You learn to live with it. You hang cloth when you can. You stuff moss in cracks. You tell yourself it could be worse, because it always could. Inside, the space is shared. One room, maybe two, if someone was lucky enough to tack on a lean-to. Everything happens here. Cooking, mending, sleeping, arguing, praying. Privacy is a luxury that belongs to people who have rooms to spare. You don't. So you turn your face to the wall when you need to be alone in your thoughts. The hearth sits in the center like a small sun. It's built of stone if you're lucky, clay if you're not. Smoke rises toward a hole in the roof. Sometimes it escapes. Sometimes it lingers, curling under beams, staining everything dark. Your eyes water so often you forget that clear eyes exist. You cough, not because you are sick, but because the air is thick with your own survival. Near the fire hangs the pot. The pot is heavy, blackened, older than you perhaps. It has been scraped and wiped and heated so many times that it feels like a member of the household. It holds pottage, that eternal stew. It never truly ends. It only changes. You add what you have. You take what you need. The bottom is always a little thicker, a little more bitter, a little more haunted by whatever came before. Truthfully, I find the idea both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because warmth and routine can be a kind of lullaby. Unsettling because it means there is no clean beginning, no fresh start. The taste of yesterday is always in today. You stir it with a wooden spoon worn smooth by years of use. The spoon fits your hand like it belongs there. As you stir, the surface shifts, slow and heavy. Steam rises, carrying the smell of cabbage, leeks, barley. Sometimes it's mostly water. Sometimes it's thick enough to cling to bread. Today, there's a small piece of salted fat someone traded for eggs. Not much. A strip no longer than 2 fingers. You drop it in and watch it disappear beneath the surface. A quiet sacrifice. Bread sits nearby, wrapped in cloth. Dark bread, dense bread. The kind that feels like a stone when it's stale. You break it, not cut it, because knives are precious and hands are faster. The crust cracks. A few crumbs fall onto the table. You catch them with the edge of your palm and sweep them back into the cloth. Nothing is wasted. Even crumbs can be softened in broth later. Even crumbs can silence hunger for a minute. You eat slowly, not to savor, but to make it last. The first bite is warm. The second is warmer. The taste is earthy, grey, steady. It fills the mouth, then the belly, then the mind, like fog. You feel your shoulders drop a fraction. You feel your thoughts become less sharp. Hunger does that, makes everything pointed. Food blunts the edge. Children eat too. They don't talk much in the morning. They are saving energy. Their hair sticks up in odd angles. Their cheeks are smudged. They look like small animals learning the shape of the world. One of them glances at the pot as if trying to judge whether there will be enough later. You pretend not to see. You don't want them to learn worry too early, but the village teaches it anyway. After eating, the day becomes work again. But even work here has texture. You step outside and feel the cold on your face, the kind that wakes you more than any thought. The yard is slick with damp. Chickens peck at invisible things. A neighbor's dog watches you with tired eyes, tail still. Somewhere, someone is splitting wood. Each strike of the axe makes a clean sound that echoes off the huts. A sharp note that feels almost musical because it is precise. Today, a section of your wall needs patching. You noticed it last night when wind blew smoke the wrong way and you felt a draft against your ankle. A draft is a warning. It says winter can reach you if it wants. So you gather mud, straw, a little manure. You mix it in a shallow trough, pressing the wet mass with your hands until it becomes workable. The cold seeps into your fingers. Your nails fill with earth. You don't mind the dirt. Dirt is honest. Dirt tells you what you've been doing. You press the daub into the crack. Push, smooth, push again. The wall accepts it reluctantly. Your palm leaves a faint print that will dry there, a signature no one will admire. You look at it anyway. You feel a small satisfaction, like straightening a blanket before sleep. By afternoon, you are back to the pot. You add more water, a handful of dried peas, a few leaves someone gathered from the edge of the woods, the safe ones, the ones you learned to recognize because you watched an elder chew them first. The pot bubbles. The sound is soft, steady. It becomes the heartbeat of the room. Night arrives without ceremony. The light fades. The shutters rattle. The fire glows lower. People settle into their places like stones sinking into mud. You lie down and feel straw prick your skin through cloth. You adjust. You pull the wool blanket up. It smells of smoke and sheep and the faint sourness of sweat. You don't dislike it. It is familiar. Familiarity is its own kind of comfort. You listen to breathing, to the cow shifting its weight, to the wind worrying at the roof, to the pot cooling with tiny clicks, and you think quietly, without fully meaning to, that this house, this compromise, has held you again today. That is enough. Before sleep fully claims you, you take a few slow sips of the village's safer drink. Not water, not quite. Small beer, thin ale brewed from whatever grain could be spared, just enough to keep the liquid from turning against you. The cup is chipped. The ale is cloudy. It smells faintly of sour bread and damp wood. You drink anyway, feeling the warmth move down your throat like a quiet torch. It doesn't make you brave. It just makes the night feel less sharp. The fire is banked low. Coals glow like buried jewels. You lie down, and the first sleep comes gently, the way fog fills a hollow. Then, later, you wake, not in fear, simply awake. The room is darker now, and the silence is thick with tiny sounds. Straw settling, a mouse making a bold little scratch near the rafters, someone breathing with a soft wheeze that will be talked about tomorrow in the careful way people talk about sickness. You listen, eyes open, staring at the ceiling beams you know by heart. One beam has a knot shaped like a closed eye. You've looked at it so many nights that it feels like it has watched you grow older. You sit up, wrap a cloak around your shoulders, and stir the coals with a stick. A small flare answers you. Orange for a second, then red again. That's all you need. Proof that warmth is still possible. Proof that morning is not a ridiculous idea. You lie back down. Second sleep takes you deeper, slower, as if the house itself is rocking you, imperfectly, stubbornly, into rest. Somewhere outside, wind combs through the thatch and the bare branches, a long, patient sound. You let it pass over you like a hand smoothing hair, and your thoughts loosen, one by one, into dark quiet. Morning does not ask if you are ready. It arrives anyway, pale light seeping through shutters that never close properly, drawing thin lines across the dirt floor. You wake to the same smells. Smoke, wool, damp earth, the faint sharpness of animals. Your body argues with you for a moment, joints stiff, fingers numb, and then it remembers the agreement you've made with this life. You rise, you feed the fire, you swallow a few mouthfuls of pottage that tastes like yesterday, because it is yesterday, reshaped, and then you feel it even before anyone says it out loud. That sense of being watched, not by wolves or spirits, not by the forest, though those are always there in the back of your mind. This is different. This is human. This is the weight of someone else's ownership pressing down on the village like a low cloud. The steward is coming. You can't see him yet, but the rumour moves ahead of him. A child runs between huts with a message that is mostly breathless fear. A neighbour leans close and says his name as if names have power. Someone says he was seen on the muddy track near the elm, riding a horse that looks too well fed for this world. Your hands become more careful. Your words become smaller. It's strange, isn't it? How a village can feel free on quiet days, even when it isn't. How you can almost forget, while mending a fence or stirring a pot, that the soil under your nails is not truly yours. You work it, you bleed on it, you bury your dead near it. Still, the law says it belongs to the Lord on the hill, and if the law says it, then it is true enough to break you. You are what they call a villain. Not a villain in the storybook sense, not a monster, not a man with a dagger in the dark, just a category, a word that means you are tied to the land like a rope tied to a post. You can tug, you can twist, you can plead. The rope stays. Most days, the rope feels invisible. On days like this, it burns. You step outside and the air is cold, damp enough to cling to your skin. The track through the village is a ribbon of mud. It holds the marks of yesterday's cart, yesterday's boots, yesterday's rain. You watch your neighbour's chickens scatter when a dog trots by. You hear the low murmur of people gathering, not in celebration, never that, but in the careful way you gather when something important is about to happen and you don't want to be late. Someone wipes their hands on their tunic. Someone tucks hair under a cap. Someone tells a child, softly, to stand still and look respectful. The steward appears as a shape first. Horse and rider at the edge of the field, dark against the pale sky. The horse's hooves make a wet sucking sound in the track. Each step pulls at mud and releases it with a slow, reluctant slurp. The steward sits upright, coat heavier than yours, boots cleaner than yours, hands gloved. There is a small bag hanging at his side. You don't know what is inside. Paper, perhaps, wax tablets, a knife, a piece of bread, something that belongs to a world where things can be kept dry. He rides like someone who expects the road to make room. The village does. He stops near the elder's hut, near Tom, because Tom is the closest thing you have to an official mouth. Tom bows too quickly. You can tell he wants to seem wise, wants to seem calm. His goat watches from behind his legs, unimpressed. The steward dismounts with a practiced motion, boot to ground, weight shifting, cloak settling. He looks around, not at faces, but at bodies, the way you look at sacks of grain, counting without seeming to. His eyes are pale, his cheeks are wind-reddened. He smells faintly of horse and leather, and the sharp soap scent of someone who can afford soap. He clears his throat. It is not a loud sound, yet the village goes quiet. Tax, he says. One word, enough. You already know what you owe, in the way you know where the roof leaks. It is a fact you live with. Still, hearing the word makes your stomach tighten. Even if you ate, the dews come in layers. Grain first, always. A portion of your rye, your barley, your oats. A share calculated by people who do not kneel in the mud to sow it. You bring sacks that feel lighter than you wish they did. The steward's man, a reeve or a bailiff, steps forward with a scale. He measures. He writes. The scratching of his stylus on wax sounds louder than it should. Each scratch feels like it is carving into your ribs. You feel the rough weave of the sack strap biting into your shoulder as you lift it forward. The grain inside shifts with a dull whisper like dry rain. For a foolish second you imagine refusing. Then you remember winter, and you let the sack go, watching it leave your hands as if it were a piece of your own future. Eggs come next. Chickens are lifted, inspected, counted. A hen flutters, offended. A child reaches out as if to protect it, then remembers who is watching and pulls back. The steward's man takes the eggs and places them in a basket lined with straw. The basket looks too clean, as if it has never been set down in manure. Then wool, a tuft here, a bundle there, rough and oily. You can smell the sheep on it. You can smell your own hands too, because you handled it yesterday. The steward does not touch it. He nods. His man takes it. Sometimes it is a pig. Sometimes a chicken meant for the Lord's table. Sometimes ale, if you've brewed enough. Sometimes labor. Labor is the strangest tax of all, because it steals time. A few days a week, or more, when harvest comes, you work the Lord's fields instead of your own. You wake before dawn, walk to his land, and bend your back for someone else's bread. You don't get paid. You get permission to keep living where you already live. You learn to measure your life in what belongs to others. Your best grain goes uphill. Your strongest day goes uphill. Your youngest son's hands, when he is old enough to be useful, go uphill. When I imagine it, I always feel a cold anger rise and then fade, because anger is expensive. It burns energy you don't have. Still, it's there, like a coal you keep buried. You don't let it flame. You just know it exists. Fees hide everywhere. Want to marry? There is a fee. Want to inherit your father's strip of land? A fee. Want to grind grain? You must use the Lord's mill, and there is a fee for that too, even though the mill exists, because the Lord allows it to exist. Want to bake bread? In some places you must use the Lord's oven, and you pay for the privilege of heat. Heat itself feels owned. You stand in line for the mill on certain days, sack on shoulder, waiting with others. The mill is a squat building near the stream, loud with the grinding of stone. The sound is constant, a deep, rough roar that makes conversation difficult. Flour dust hangs in the air and sticks to sweat. You wipe your brow and it comes away white. The miller's hands are white too, but his fingers are thicker, softer, as if the grain does more work than he does. You watch him take his portion, the miller's toll, before he hands back the sack, eyes already moving to the next person. So you swallow your words. You swallow them as often as you swallow thin stew. Back in the village, the steward finishes his counting. He asks questions in the careful voice of someone who thinks questions are neutral. How many chickens? How many children? How much rye did you sow? Who is sick? Who has died since last visit? Each question feels like a hand reaching into your home. You answer carefully, short, plain, true enough to satisfy, not detailed enough to invite attention. You can feel the whole village holding its breath. Even the dogs seem quieter. When the steward moves on to Tom's hut, you see the ledger, a rectangle of parchment, a list of marks that mean nothing to you, yet those marks decide whether you will keep your plot. It's a strange helplessness, watching someone write your life down in a language you cannot read. You stand there and you smile politely, because you've learned that politeness is armor. Sometimes the steward is bored. That is the best kind. Sometimes he is in a bad mood, and then his mood becomes your problem. Today he seems tired. His eyes flick toward the clouds as if calculating weather. His jaw tightens as if he has been chewing on worry. Perhaps the Lord's demands have grown. Perhaps the Lord owes someone else. Debts move downhill. They always do. At last, the steward nods. He mounts his horse again. The horse snorts, impatient, and you catch a brief smell of warm animal and wet leather. The steward rides away. The village exhales, slowly, like a body waking from a nightmare and realizing it is still alive. You think it's over, but there is always more, because the Lord's authority is not only about taking, it is also about judging. Manor court. The words sound official, almost grand, but the court is usually a rough gathering near the manor, or sometimes in the village itself. A circle of people standing in mud while someone with a title listens. You don't go every time. No one wants to go every time. But when you are summoned, you go. You go because absence is noticed. Today, 2 neighbors are called. A dispute about a boundary. A strip of land near the old elm where the ground gets soft. One man claims the other moved a marker stone. The other swears he didn't. Their voices are tense, but kept low, because high voices are dangerous around power. You walk with the others toward the manor. It sits on slightly higher ground, not dramatic, just enough to remind you that some people live above you. The path up is rutted. Your boots, if you have boots, sink into mud. If you don't, your feet go numb and then begin to burn as cold settles into skin. You smell wet grass, crushed under many footsteps. You smell smoke from the manor's hearth, richer somehow, thicker, as if the wood there is always dry. The manor is larger than your hut. That is obvious. Still, the difference feels like an insult carved into timber. Walls that hold straighter, roof that sags less, a door that fits properly, a window that might even have oiled cloth, or a small pane of glass catching light like a miracle. The Lord is not always present. Sometimes he sends a representative, sometimes he doesn't bother at all. The steward speaks for him, and that is enough. Today, the Lord sits on a bench under an awning, protected from drizzle. He wears a cloak lined with fur. The fur looks soft, like something you have only felt on the rare days you slaughtered a rabbit and held its skin warm before it cooled. The Lord's face is ordinary. That is the odd part. You expect monsters to look like monsters. Often they look like men. He watches the peasants with mild interest, the way you might watch clouds. The dispute begins. The 2 men speak. The steward listens. A few villagers speak as witnesses, careful not to take sides too openly. The words tumble out in the dialect of the fields, not the polished language of court. The Lord seems barely engaged until the mention of taxes, until the question of who owes what. Then his eyes sharpen. Because land is money. Land is control. Land is everything. The verdict comes quickly. A fine. A small one, but still a fine. One man must give a loaf each week for a month. The other must repair a section of the boundary fence. Both must swear not to fight again. They bow. They accept. They walk away with their shoulders tense and their mouths tight. Justice here is not about fairness. It is about keeping order. Order keeps grain moving uphill. As you walk back down the hill, rain begins to fall more steadily. It taps on your hood, on your shoulders, on the mud, making the track shine. The village appears again. Low huts, thin smoke. It looks fragile from this angle, as if one bad season could wash it away. You think of how easily your life could be erased. A failed harvest, a sickness, a new Lord with a cruel mood. And then you think of the strange comfort buried inside the cruelty. The system is harsh, yes. Still, it is predictable. You know what the steward will ask. You know what you must bring. You know the shape of the rope around your life. Uncertainty is worse than hunger sometimes. Uncertainty is the wolf in the nine, dark. This, at least, is a wolf you can name. You reach your hut. You push open the door. The smell of smoke and stew greets you like a familiar hand. You step inside, shake rain from your sleeves, and for a moment you let yourself rest against the wall. It is not your wall, but it holds you anyway. Later, when the fire burns low and the village quiets, you listen again to the soft noises of survival. You feel the day's weight settle into your bones. You think of the steward's pale eyes, the ledger's silent marks, the Lord's ordinary face. Then you close your eyes, not because you are safe, because you are tired, and tiredness is its own kind of mercy. Illness does not knock. It arrives the way damp arrives, quietly, seeping through cracks you didn't notice until your socks are wet and your skin is already chilled. In your village, sickness is not a headline. It is background. A cough that lasts too long. A fever that returns at the wrong season. A cut that should have healed, but instead becomes hot and angry, swollen like it is keeping a secret. This morning the air feels ordinary, grey, cold enough to keep breath visible. You step outside and the ground is slick with last night's mist. The track between huts holds shallow puddles, and each puddle mirrors the sky in a dull way like a tired eye. Chickens peck, heads bobbing. Smoke lifts from roofs in thin ribbons. If you didn't know better, you might think today will be like yesterday. Then you hear it. A cough deeper than the usual throat-clearing coughs of winter. This one comes from inside a chest like a stone rolling downhill. It ends with a wet sound, and the silence that follows feels heavy, as if the whole village pauses to listen for the next one. It's from Marjorie's hut. Marjorie is old. Everyone calls her old, even though no one knows numbers well enough to say what that means. She has hands like dried roots, fingers bent from decades of pulling and twisting. She has survived winters that killed stronger men. When she speaks, people lean in, because her voice carries the weight of having seen things and simply kept going. You stand in the lane and look at her door. The door is shut. That isn't unusual. But today, it feels like a sign. Truthfully, I always feel a chill at moments like this. Not because I believe in omens the way the priest speaks of them, but because I recognize that thin line between an ordinary day and the day your world becomes smaller. You know the feeling, don't you? When a sound changes the air, when you suddenly notice your own heart beating, like it is reminding you that it can stop. People begin to whisper, not loudly. Loud whispers are dangerous, but the words move anyway. Mouth to ear, ear to mouth. She's been coughing all night. Her skin is hot. She won't eat. A child is sent to fetch the wise woman. In your village, she is called Elohim. She is not young. She is not old in the way Marjorie is old. She is in that middle space where her hair has started to thin, but her hands are still steady. She knows herbs. She knows how to boil, how to wrap, how to murmur the right words when people need words. She has delivered babies, and she has washed bodies for burial. She has seen enough blood to treat it like something practical. Elohim arrives with a basket. It bumps against her hip as she walks. Inside are bundles of dried plants tied with twine, a small clay jar, a strip of linen, and a knife with a worn handle. Her face is calm, but her eyes do that quick counting thing, the same way you count grain in a sack. She counts risks. She knocks once. Then she opens the door without waiting. You don't go in. Not immediately. Sickness is a strange thing here. There is no written rule that says stay away, but there is an instinct, a social gravity. People hold back a little, the way animals do. You don't have extra food. You don't have extra strength. You can't afford to catch whatever has taken hold of someone else. Still, you can't afford to abandon them either. because the village survives on mutual obligation. If you let one person fall alone, you are teaching the world how to let you fall alone later. So you stand close enough to hear, but far enough to pretend you are not standing close. Inside, Eloin speaks softly. You catch fragments through the thin wall. Breathe slowly. Open your mouth. Drink this. Her voice is steady, almost gentle, and it makes you want to believe she can negotiate with illness the way you negotiate with weather. A little patience, a little skill, a little luck. A pot is set on the hearth. Water begins to heat. The smell of damp herbs rises, bitter and sharp. It leaks out into the lane and mixes with smoke and manure and wet wool. The whole village breathes it in, as if smell alone can protect. Someone says, bad air, miasma, the idea that sickness rides on stench. So people do what they always do. They fight smell. They stuff rosemary and sage into their pockets. They hang garlic above doors. They rub vinegar on cloth and press it to their faces until their eyes sting. The priest once told you to keep holy water near the threshold. Someone else swears iron drives away evil. A nail in the doorframe. A horseshoe hung crookedly. A knife blade under a pillow. You do it even when you aren't sure. Because certainty is rare, and ritual fills the gap. By midday, Marjorie's cough is joined by fever. You see her granddaughter step out, pale, hair unbraided, eyes red from lack of sleep. She holds a bowl that sloshes with thin broth. Her hands tremble slightly. She looks around as if trying to find help without asking for it. You offer to take water from the well. The well is a dark mouth in the ground, lined with stone. The stones are slick with moss. The rope is rough, frayed where 1,000 hands have pulled. You lower the bucket and hear the splash far below. You pull it up slowly, feeling the weight fight you. Your arms burn. The cold air makes your fingers ache. When the bucket rises, the water inside looks clean. But you know better than to trust what looks clean. You boil it anyway. You pour it into a pot and set it near the fire, watching for the first tiny bubbles. Bubbles mean safety, or at least they mean you have done something that feels like safety. The priest arrives when the sun begins to sink. His steps are careful, cloak pulled tight. He crosses himself at the threshold before entering, as if the hut itself might bite. His voice, when he prays, is low and steady, a sound meant to soothe everyone listening more than it is meant to reach heaven. By evening, the cough becomes a rattle, a wet, scraping sound that seems to come from deep inside Marjorie, like something is trying to claw its way out. You sit by your own fire and listen, because sound travels in a small village. You hear it through walls, through wind, through your own thoughts. Sleep is light. It has edges. You drift and then wake, as if your body refuses to fully surrender when it senses danger nearby. Near midnight, someone knocks on your door. Not urgent enough to be panic, but serious. It's the granddaughter. Her face is washed by moonlight, making her look like a ghost of herself. Eloin says, "Can you come, just for a moment?" You wrap your cloak around you and step outside. The night is cold, colder than the day promised. Stars are sharp. The air smells of frost. Your boots crunch on thin ice that formed on puddles. Each step feels loud, even though you are walking softly. At night, everything sounds like it matters. Inside Marjorie's hut, the air is thick with smoke and sweat. The hearth glows low. Shadows press into corners. Marjorie lies on a straw mattress, hair damp with fever. Her eyes are half open, unfocused. Her skin is shiny, stretched tight. When she breathes, her chest lifts unevenly, as if one side has forgotten how. Eloin looks up at you. Her face is tired. "Hold her hand," she says. You take Marjorie's hand. It is smaller than you expect, bony, warm, in an unpleasant way. Her fingers twitch against yours, as if she is reaching for the world and slipping off it. You feel your own pulse in your wrist. and you wonder if she can feel it too. The priest begins to pray. Oil is applied to her forehead, a cross traced, words spoken that promise mercy. Marjorie coughs once, then again. The second cough is weaker. The third barely happens at all. And then there is a pause. It is not dramatic. No scream, no final confession. Just a pause that stretches too long until Eloin leans close to Marjorie's mouth and watches for breath that does not come. Eloin's shoulders drop slightly. The priest's prayer shifts. The granddaughter makes a sound that is not quite a cry, more like air being squeezed from a bellows. Marjorie is gone. You sit very still, holding her hand, even though it no longer holds you back. Her skin cools quickly. It is strange how fast a body changes when the thing inside it has stopped. Someone covers her face with a cloth. A simple gesture, but it feels important, like closing a door. Outside, the night continues. Wind moves through bare branches. A dog barks once and then quiets. The world does not pause for grief. The next day, the village becomes careful. The body must be washed. Warm water is heated. Cloths are dipped. Eloin directs with the calm of someone who has done this too many times to let it break her. You help lift Marjorie's limbs, feeling how heavy a human body is when it is no longer animated by will. Her joints resist. Her skin is cool and slightly tacky. You try not to think too much. Thinking makes you slow, and slowness is dangerous on a day with many tasks. The priest insists on certain rites. Marjorie must be buried on sacred ground, a short mass. A bell rung, if someone has the strength to pull the rope. The bell rings once, then again. The sound travels over fields, over the forest edge, over the track that leads nowhere. It feels like a warning to the world. Someone has fallen out of the living, and then the village watches itself, because sickness rarely comes alone. It is like fire. It finds dry timber. A few days later, another cough appears, then a fever, then a child with a face too pale and eyes too bright. People begin to avoid one another in small ways. No one says quarantine. They just stand farther apart in the lane. They stop sharing cups. They wipe their hands more often. They hold their breath when someone coughs. The priest speaks of sin because sin is his only map. Eloin speaks of dirt and vermin because dirt is what she can actually touch. Between those two explanations, the village tries to build a wall out of prayer and smoke and bitter herbs. The graveyard begins to fill. At first, one new mound, then two, then three. The soil is cold and heavy. You dig with a spade that bites into earth reluctantly. Each scoop makes a soft thud as it lands beside the hole. Your breath is loud in your ears. Your hands blister even through rough gloves. The body you are burying is wrapped in cloth, tied at feet and head. It is lighter than you expect, because sickness has eaten what it could. You say a prayer because that is what you do. You don't know if the prayer travels anywhere. You say it anyway. The bell rings so often that it loses meaning. At first, each ring made people pause. Now it becomes part of the day, like wind in thatch. The village adapts to horror the way it adapts to cold, by tightening its cloak and continuing. When the wave finally eases, it does not feel like victory. It feels like exhaustion. You look around and count who is left. A hut that used to smoke every morning now sits dark. A voice that used to argue loudly about fences is gone. The fields still need tending. The pot still needs stirring. Obligations do not pause for grief. At night, when the fire is low and the village is quiet, you lie on your straw and listen to the breathing around you. Each breath is a small defiance. Each breath is fragile. You close your eyes. You let the sound of wind through cracks become a lullaby, not because you are unafraid, but because sleep is the only place your body can rest from, remembering that it could all disappear so quickly. And in that dim space between waking and dreaming, you realize something that feels both dark and oddly peaceful. Surviving does not mean you have won. It only means you have been allowed to continue. For now, in the days after, you notice how the village sounds different, not louder, not quieter in an obvious way, just altered, as if a few notes have been removed from a familiar song. The morning chores still happen, but they happen with more pauses. Someone stops mid-step to listen to their own breathing. Someone else touches their throat, testing the swallow, wondering if a small scratch is nothing or a beginning. You scrub your hands until they sting. The water is cold. The soap, if you have any, is harsh and smells faintly of old fat. You rinse and the skin on your knuckles tightens and cracks. It's a small pain, a clean pain, and strangely it comforts you because it is a pain with a clear cause. Your body understands it. You can point to it and say, this came from work, not from invisible teeth. At night, the fire speaks in little clicks and sighs. A coal shifts, ash collapses. Somewhere outside, an owl calls once and then stops. You turn your head on the straw and feel the roughness under your cheek. You think of Marjorie's hand cooling in yours, and you try to set the memory down gently, like placing a bowl on a table without making it clatter. You breathe in, you breathe out. You listen to the household breathing in the dark. And because you are still here, because the roof still holds and the pot still exists and morning still arrives, you do what peasants have always done. You keep going. Some years you are hungry, other years you are in famine. And the difference is not in the stomach so much as it is in the mind. Hunger is a daily ache you can bargain with. You eat slower, you chew longer, you drink weak ale and pretend it counts as a meal. Famine is when the bargaining stops working, when the rules you thought the world followed simply don't. It begins quietly, the way most disasters begin. Spring comes wet. Not the gentle wet that makes soil smell rich and alive, but the stubborn wet that turns paths into glue. Rain hangs in the air like a curtain that never fully lifts. You wake to the sound of drops hitting thatch, then the sound of drops sliding into a bucket you placed beneath the leak you still haven't fixed. The bucket fills, you empty it, it fills again. The whole season feels like that. You walk to the fields and your boots sink. The mud clings. Each step makes a sucking sound, as if the earth is trying to keep you. You look down and see water gathered in shallow hollows between rows. Seed should not sit in water like that. Seed wants damp, yes, but not drowning. You scatter it anyway, because what else do you do? Your fingers are cold. The grain is small and hard against your palm. You toss it in a practiced motion, a gentle arc. It lands and disappears into mud. You cover it with soil, trying to convince yourself you are planting hope, not feeding the ground. Days pass. The rain keeps coming. The shoots appear, thin and hesitant, green like a promise spoken too softly. Then the shoots yellow. They lean. Some collapse. You kneel and touch them, feeling the weak stem between your fingertips. The plant feels tired already. In the village, people stop talking about the weather out loud. Not because it isn't on their minds, but because saying it makes it real. So instead of words, you exchange looks. The kind of look that asks a question without asking it. How much do you have left? Because everyone remembers the last bad year, the year the rye grew strange, the year the bread smelled wrong, the year children cried at night, and then, later, stopped crying. Memory in a village is not written down, but it is carried in the body. It lives in the way you flinch when you see a thin stew. It lives in the way you save crumbs without thinking. By early summer, you begin to ration. It starts almost politely. One fewer ladle of pottage, a slice of bread cut thinner, an apple split between two children instead of one. No one announces the rationing. It just happens, like everyone agreed without speaking. You see your neighbour's wife scrape the bottom of the pot a little longer, trying to coax more out of nothing. You see children chew slowly and stare at the fire while they chew, as if their mouths are doing work and they want to respect it. The pottage becomes paler. More water, fewer grains. The smell is still warm, but the warmth begins to feel like a trick. Steam rises, you inhale it, and for a moment the body thinks food is coming. Then the spoon tastes like thin earth. You tell yourself it will improve after harvest. You tell yourself the Lord will open his stores. You tell yourself God watches. Truthfully, I always find this part of the story hard to speak about, even in a voice meant to soothe, because there is something especially cruel about slow hunger. It doesn't strike like illness. It doesn't take you quickly. It teaches you to live inside absence. By late summer, the fields make their answer clear. The heads of grain are small. Some are empty. When you rub them between your fingers, the husk cracks and nothing drops out. You stand there with a handful of disappointment and feel the sun on the back of your neck. The sky is bright. Birds fly overhead, careless, as if the world is fine. That contrast hurts more than the cold ever does. In the village, people begin to eat things that are not meant to be eaten. Weeds first. Young nettles, boiled until they stop stinging. Bitter leaves from the forest edge. Roots dug from places you never dug before. You know the ground well, so well that you can tell by touch where it is soft and where it hides stones. You scrape at it with a tool, and the tool rings against rock. The sound is sharp. It sounds like refusal. You move a little farther and try again, and this time the earth gives reluctantly, like an old man opening a stiff hand. You pull up a root. It is pale, twisted, and smells like nothing. You wash it in cold water, peel it with a knife that is too dull. You boil it anyway. It softens. It becomes chewable. It becomes survival. Bread becomes ritual. One loaf is counted in slices before it is even cut. You watch the knife go down, and you feel the unfairness of physics. Bread does not stretch. It cannot be made bigger by wanting. So the slices become thinner, then thinner still, until they are almost like promises you can see through. Children learn to ask for less. That, to me, is always the most chilling thing. Not the empty fields, not the thin stew. The way a child, who used to beg for a crust with sticky hands, sits quietly and accepts a smaller piece without protest. A child should not have that kind of patience. It feels like the famine is teaching them something too early. Animals begin to look like food in a new way. Not immediately. At first, you protect them because animals are future. A cow is milk. A goat is cheese. Chickens are eggs. A pig is a winter plan. But famine eats the future. You stop feeding the animals first. You tell yourself they can find their own food. You let them wander farther, and you pretend you aren't listening when they come back weaker, ribs starting to show beneath hair. One morning you find a chicken dead, no blood, no fox tracks, just collapsed, as if it ran out of whatever kept it standing. You pick it up. It is light. Too light, still it is meat. You clean it in silence. The smell of feathers and warm innards fills your hut. It is not a pleasant smell, but it is a powerful one. It makes your mouth water in a way that feels shameful. You boil the bones. Then you boil them again. Then you boil them a third time, hoping the marrow will remember what nourishment is. The Lord's steward comes. He always comes, even in a bad year, perhaps especially in a bad year, because obligations do not disappear when your stomach is empty. His horse splashes through mud. His boots are better than yours. His cloak is thicker. He carries a ledger, a clean thing, dry and orderly, like it lives in a different world. He asks for grain. You look at him and you want to laugh, not because it is funny, but because it is absurd. You have a handful of bad seed, a pot of water, and a child watching you with two large eyes. And this man asks for grain as if the fields are full and the world is fair. You answer carefully. You never answer with anger. Anger costs you. Anger invites punishment. You offer what you can. A little, not enough. You watch his eyes narrow slightly. He makes a mark on the page. Ink on parchment. A debt made real. After he leaves, you sit down hard on a bench. Your legs feel weak, not from labor this time, but from the weight of knowing that even famine has fees. By autumn, the village is quieter. It is not silence like peace. It is silence like caution. People stay inside more, not to rest, but to avoid spending energy. You learn how expensive movement is when food is scarce. A walk to the well becomes a decision. A trip to the forest becomes a calculation. You move slowly, not in a dreamy way, but in a conserving way, like a candle wick trying to last through a long night. Sleep changes too. You wake because your stomach is loud, not a growl, but a hollow sound, like wind in an empty barrel. You lie on your straw and listen to your own body, and you realize how much noise a human makes when there is nothing to digest. You dream of bread. You dream of thick stew. You wake with your mouth tasting of nothing and your hands clenched as if they were holding a loaf. Someone in the village disappears. They leave without a farewell. A man who was always thin, a widow with 2 children. Maybe they walk toward a town. Maybe they walk toward a monastery. Maybe they walk toward the forest and simply keep walking until walking stops. No one follows. Not because no one cares, but because everyone is barely holding their own world together. Then the deaths begin. At first, it is the very old. It feels almost expected. The village tells itself a story that makes it easier. They were near the end anyway. They were tired anyway. They are simply moving on. Then it is someone younger, a mother who still had strength in her arms, a boy who used to race down the lane. A body can survive a surprising amount of emptiness, but not forever. Burials are smaller now. Prayers are shorter. Not because faith is weaker, but because strength is. One day, you stand by a shallow grave, and the wind blows cold across the open earth. The soil smells raw. You look at the faces around you and see cheekbones more visible than before. Eyes too bright, lips cracked. People are becoming sharper, as if hunger is carving them into a more fragile shape. In the worst weeks, you begin to consider things you once would not consider. Bark, for example. Not a metaphor. Actual bark. You go to the forest edge with a knife and find a tree with a thick trunk. The tree is alive. It stands there quietly, not knowing it is about to be asked to feed you. You press the knife into the outer layer and peel it back. Underneath is the pale inner bark, fibrous. You scrape it, gather it, and carry it home. You dry it by the fire. It smells like wood and smoke and desperation. You grind it with what tools you have. It becomes coarse dust. You mix it with a little flour. If you have flour and water, the paste is grey and sticky. You shape it into something like a loaf, though calling it bread feels like a lie. You bake it. The crust cracks hard. The inside remains dense. You cut a piece, and the knife meets resistance like it is cutting stone. You chew. It tastes bitter. It tastes like the forest is reluctantly keeping you alive. You swallow anyway. There is a moment in hunger where shame begins to fade. Not because you become less human, but because survival is louder than pride. You still feel the shame. Yes, it flickers. But it is like a small candle in a windstorm. It cannot compete with the body's simple demand. One night you hear scratching in the corner. A rat, or something like one. In a good year, you would chase it. You would curse it for stealing grain. Now you watch it with a different kind of attention. It moves quickly, clever. It pauses, nose twitching, eyes reflecting firelight like tiny beads. You feel your throat tighten, not because you want to eat it, but because you realize you are thinking about eating it. You do not speak that thought out loud. Some thoughts are private, even in a one-room house. Still, you set a crude trap. A piece of stale bread, barely a piece, tied to a string. You wait. When it works, you feel no triumph. You feel a kind of quiet relief that makes your eyes sting. You cook it when no one is looking. You clean it with careful hands, pretending it is just another animal. You boil it with herbs to cut the taste. The smell is sharp and unpleasant, and yet your body responds to it like it responds to any meat. You eat quickly. You wipe your mouth. You sit in the dark afterward and feel the guilt settle in, heavy and familiar, and still you don't regret it, because famine does not ask what you believe, it asks what you will do. Then, as all famines do, it begins to loosen its grip. Not suddenly, not with a miracle, with small changes, a week of better weather, a rain that comes at the right time, a patch of green that looks less sick. You plant again even though you are tired. Your hands shake slightly. Your knees ache. You feel older than you did a year ago, and you wonder how hunger can age you faster than winter. When the first real harvest comes, it is not huge. It is not celebratory. It is simply enough. Enough to thicken the stew again. Enough to make bread that does not crack teeth. Enough to make children laugh, softly at first, as if laughter is something they must relearn. You cut the first good loaf. The crust is dark. The smell is warm and honest. You hold it for a moment before eating, and you feel tears in your eyes that you do not wipe away. Because the loaf is not just food, it is proof. Proof that you endured. Proof that the village, battered and quiet, still exists. You eat slowly. You breathe in the steam from a pot that finally has something in it. You let the warmth settle in your chest. And for a little while, in the flicker of firelight, the world feels almost gentle again. Even then, you keep the habit of saving crumbs. You cannot unlearn famine in a single season. Your fingers still sweep the table at night, gathering what is left, and your heart still listens quietly for the sound of hunger returning. By the time you can lift a hoe without your hands shaking, the church has already been in your life longer than your own memory. Not as an idea, not as a building you occasionally visit. It is more like weather. It is the rhythm that presses on the village even when you are not thinking about it. You can forget a story, you can forget a face, you cannot forget the bell. Because the bell tells you what day it is, what season you are in, what you are allowed to eat, what you're supposed to fear, what you're supposed to hope for. Some mornings, before sunrise, has fully decided to arrive. You step outside, and the world looks almost colourless. Frost laces the grass. The air is sharp enough to sting your nostrils. Smoke rises from a few roofs in thin grey threads. Your breath comes out in pale clouds that drift and dissolve as if even your breathing is temporary. Then, somewhere beyond the trees, a bell rings. It is not your village's bell. Your village does not have enough stone for that kind of pride. The sound comes from another place, a chapel in another valley, a church that has walls thick enough to hold echoes. The wind carries the bell in soft pulses. One strike, then a pause, then another, like the world is tapping on the door of your mind. You listen without meaning to, because the bell is not only sound, it is instruction. It tells you when to stop working and when to begin again. It tells you that this day belongs to a saint you have never seen and never will. It tells you that your back and your hands, your hunger and your small joys, all of it is meant to fit into a calendar that was written in a language you do not speak, Latin. Even the word feels heavy. It has sharp edges in the mouth, like biting down on a pebble. The priest speaks it in long strings of sound, and to you it might as well be a spell. Sometimes I wonder if that is part of the design. You know the feeling, don't you? When you hear words that are clearly important to the person speaking, and yet they do not belong to you at all. It creates distance. It creates awe. It creates obedience without needing to say the word obedience. On Sundays, you walk to the church. The path is familiar. Mud, stones, a few patches of grass worn down by feet. You feel the cold seep up through your soles, through leather that is too thin, through the places where the stitching has come loose. The sky is usually grey. If the sun appears, it looks pale and tired, like it is watching from far away. The church itself is small, but to you it feels enormous, because it is made of stone. Stone lasts. Stone remembers. Your own home is wood and mud, always shifting, always sagging, always one storm away from becoming part of the earth again. The church stands firm. The walls hold the cold in and the sound in. The smell inside is different too, not smoke and animals and stew. Here it is wax, damp stone, old wood, and something faintly metallic, like the air has been touched by coins. You stand with your family. Your feet go numb on the stone floor. You shift your weight quietly, careful not to scrape too loudly. There is no such thing as privacy here. Your neighbors see your posture. They see how you cross yourself. They see if you kneel at the right moments. It is not cruelty. It is habit. The village survives by noticing. The priest raises his hands and speaks. You do not understand the words, but you understand the shape of the moment. There is a rise in his voice, a pause, a softer tone, the way he lifts the bread, the way everyone around you lowers their heads as if an invisible weight has passed overhead. You copy them because copying is safer than asking. When the priest says your sins are forgiven, you do not ask how he knows your sins. You have told him, some of them, in whispers. The small ones, the ones you can admit without destroying yourself. You have confessed anger, impatience, envy. You have confessed thoughts you did not choose, thoughts that arrived like flies. The priest listens with a face that is both bored and severe. Sometimes he seems kind, sometimes he seems tired. Either way, his words have power, because everyone agrees they have power. The church teaches you that suffering has meaning. It is a comforting idea, in a grim way, to believe that hunger is not random, that plague is not just misfortune, that your child's fever is not just a cruel accident. If you can fit pain into a story, then pain becomes bearable. It becomes something you can carry like a heavy sack, not something that crushes you without explanation. So you accept the story. You accept that the world is arranged. Above you is the Lord, above the Lord is the King, above the King is God. And between you and God stands the church, holding keys you cannot touch. I always find it strange, that image of keys, cold metal, heavy in the hand, a priest holding them, not to open a door for you, but to remind you that the door exists and you cannot reach it without him. The church does not only guide, it also collects. The tithe is a tenth of what you produce. A tenth sounds small when spoken quickly. When you say it slowly, when you imagine it, it becomes larger, a tenth of your grain, a tenth of your eggs, a tenth of your wool, a tenth of your cider, if you have enough apples to make it, a tenth of your life. In a good year, it stings, but you survive it. In a bad year, it can feel like a hand reaching into your bowl while you are still eating. You watch the priest's helper carry sacks into the tithe barn. You watch the barn's door close. The barn is always fuller than your home. The barn always smells of abundance and dust. You tell yourself it goes to God. You know, in your bones, it goes to men. Still, you pay. Because refusal is not only disobedience, it is danger. The church can do something the Lord cannot. The Lord can take your tools, your land, your chickens. The church can take your place in the invisible world. It can tell your neighbors you are outside grace. It can refuse you burial on sacred ground. It can make your death feel lonely. So you pay, you kneel. You let the rituals wash over you like cold water. The calendar the church gives you is not just dates, it is rules. Some days you fast. You eat no meat. You eat little. You swallow hunger and call it holy. You chew bread slowly. You drink thin ale and pretend the dull warmth in your throat is spiritual. Then feast days come, bright like a candle flaring. You do not feast like nobles, not roasted swans, not spiced wine. You feast by adding a bit of fat to the pot, by baking an extra loaf, by sharing a handful of dried fruit that was saved for this exact moment. The church tells you when to do it, and you obey, and in a strange way it helps. It gives structure to desire. It gives you permission to enjoy without feeling guilty. And then it takes that permission away again, like tightening and loosening a rope. The priest brings relics sometimes. A splinter said to be from a saint's coffin. A tiny bone fragment wrapped in cloth. A ribbon touched to a shrine. People crowd close to see, eyes wide. The relic looks ordinary. That is part of its power. You want it to be dazzling. So you supply the dazzling in your imagination. You touch it with trembling fingers. You whisper a name. Street Sebastian. Street Apollonia. Street Isidore. Names for wounds, for teeth, for ploughs. If your child coughs, you say the saint's name over a bowl of broth. If your cow stops giving milk, you light a candle. If your own back aches so badly you cannot straighten, you pray and then you work anyway. Prayer is not a replacement for labor. It is a companion to labor, like a murmur beside the sound of your own breathing. Sometimes the church offers a pilgrimage. The idea makes your chest tighten with something like longing. A pilgrimage is holy travel, a sanctioned leaving. You walk roads you have heard of but never touched. You sleep under hedges. You follow other pilgrims, their feet blistered, their voices low, their bundles strapped tight. The road smells of wet earth and sweat and crushed leaves. You pass strangers. You hear dialects that sound like songs you almost recognize. You feel small and oddly alive. The world expands a little, then contracts again when you return home, and your home feels both safer and sadder because now you know the distance is real. Death is where the church's grip feels strongest. When someone is dying, the priest comes with oil. He touches forehead, lips, hands. He murmurs prayers. Candles are lit. The room smells of smoke and fear. The dying person listens, eyes unfocused, sometimes calm, sometimes terrified. The family gathers, close, too close, breath mixing. The priest speaks of heaven. He also speaks of purgatory. Purgatory is not quite hell, but it is not comfort either. It is waiting in heat. It is waiting in cleansing fire. That is what you are told. And here is the dark part, the part that settles in the gut. Waiting can be shortened by prayer, by mass, by candles, by payments. You might be poor, but you still pay. A few coins if you have them, a chicken, a day of labor, something, anything to persuade the invisible to move faster. Sometimes an indulgence seller comes through, a man with a cart, with parchment, with seals. He speaks smoothly. He says your dead mother can suffer less if you give now. He says your own sins can be lightened if you buy this promise. He smiles as if he is offering bread. People listen because people are afraid. Fear is a currency that never runs out. You stand in the lane and watch neighbors hand over coins they saved for winter. You watch the cart roll away, creaking, the seller's cloak flapping. You feel anger rise. Then you feel it sink, because anger does not change the system. Anger only burns you. You learn to live with contradictions. The priest can be kind, and he can be cruel. The church can offer comfort, and it can take your last sack of grain. The saints can feel close on a quiet night, and the tithe barn can feel like a mouth swallowing your labor. In winter, when the wind presses through every crack and the fire cannot quite warm the corners of your hut, you wrap yourself in wool and listen to the night. You hear a wolf far away, a thin howl carried by cold air. You hear the roof settle. You hear someone breathing beside you. And you whisper a prayer, not because you are pure, not because you are sure, But because the prayer is a small light you can hold in the dark, sometimes I think that is what the church truly offers, a way to feel held when everything else is slipping. Still, you cannot ignore the weight. You cannot ignore that holiness is expensive. You cannot ignore that every ceremony comes with a cost. Marriage fees, burial fees, baptism gifts. Even grief has a price tag. And yet, you keep showing up. Because if the church is wrong, then suffering is meaningless. And a world where suffering is meaningless is almost too cold to bear. So, you kneel. You cross yourself. You listen to Latin like rain on stone. You go back to your fields. You stir your pot. You bury your dead. You survive inside the quiet. Structure, because the structure, heavy as it is, gives the world shape. And shape, in a life like yours, is a kind of mercy. There's a moment I keep coming back to when I think about peasants and the church. It is the confessional. If your village is large enough to have a little screened corner, or if not, the simple act of leaning close to the priest after Mass, when everyone else is distracted by chatter and cold hands, and the slow shuffle toward home. You wait until the priest looks up. His face is ruddy from wine or weather. It can be hard to tell. His fingers are stained with ink or wax. He is not an angel. He is a man. And you, with your cap in your hands, feel smaller than you felt a moment ago. You speak softly. You tell him about impatience, about envy, about the one small theft you still taste in the back of your throat. The priest listens, sighs, frowns, sometimes surprises you with a brief gentleness, then gives you a penance that feels light as words and heavy as hunger. Say these prayers, fast. Give a candle. You do it because confession is also a way of being seen. In a life where no king knows your name, where the Lord knows only your numbers, the priest is one of the few people who will treat your inner life as something real, even if he uses it to keep you obedient. Lent arrives like a slow shadow. The ground softens, the light lingers, and the church says no meat, 40 days. Your pot turns thinner. The smell of fat disappears. Hunger becomes a low hum that follows you from the field to the hearth. Then Easter comes, and the world seems to exhale. The church is crowded, candles burn brighter, and afterward there is food that tastes almost impossible, a bit of meat, a richer bread, an egg still warm from the hen. You savor it slowly, and for a moment the church feels like shelter, not weight. The next morning you are back in the field. The miracle does not plant your crops. Your hands do, and still that brief bright day is carried like a coal in the mind, something you can cup in your palms when winter returns. You might think, after plague and famine and taxes and that endless quiet pressure from above, that one day the village would finally break. That one morning, frost still on the grass, people would step into the lane with tools held differently, not as tools, as weapons. That voices would rise, that anger would gather into something sharp enough to cut through fear. It happens sometimes. You have heard stories carried by travelers, the way smoke carries scent. A revolt in another place, a steward chased out, a manor house burned. Names like Jackery, like the Rising in England, like angry crowds shouting words you can barely imagine saying out loud. But most days, in most villages, revolt is not a story you live in. It is a rumor you hold at a distance, because revolt requires something peasants rarely have. Spare food, spare time, spare strength, spare hope. Your life is built so tightly around survival that there is no room to pull away from it. You wake with the light because you must. You work because the soil does not care what you believe. You feed animals because animals are tomorrow. You mend the roof because rain will come whether you feel ready or not. To rebel, you would have to stop doing these things. And if you stop doing these things, you do not become free. You become dead. It is a cold calculation, the kind that happens quietly in the mind while your hands keep moving. You know the Lord has men. You have seen them, sometime. A few armed riders passing along the track, their horses taller than you, their boots polished. The men carry swords that catch sunlight. They look at you as if you are part of the landscape, not hated, not loved, just there. You know the church has power. Not a sword, but something heavier in its own way. Excommunication, shame, the threat of dying outside sacred ground, buried like an animal beyond the cemetery fence. And you know the king exists somewhere, distant, almost mythical. His laws reach you through the Lord and the priest. You have never seen his face, but you have felt his shadow in every rule that pins you to the land. So rebellion feels like walking into a forest you do not know, barefoot, at night, with no fire. Still, resistance exists. It is smaller, quieter. It fits inside the cracks. A pig kept off the ledger. An extra sack of rye buried in a dry spot under the floor. A fence shifted a few steps in the night, so a strip of land becomes yours without anyone admitting it. You learn to speak carefully to the steward. When he asks how the harvest went, you answer with a shrug and a tired smile. Not too much detail. Details are dangerous. Details invite scrutiny. You offer him enough truth to satisfy his boredom, not enough truth to feed his curiosity. When the miller's fee is too high, you grind a little by hand anyway. Late at night, the stone muffled with cloth, your arms aching as you turn it. The sound is small. The flour is coarse. It is still yours. You trade in whispers, a handful of eggs for a tool, a bit of wool for salt, a favor for a favor. These are the economies the Lord cannot fully control, because he cannot be everywhere. He cannot watch every hand, every corner, every quiet exchange in the dark. Songs are resistance too. At night, by the fire, someone hums a tune that makes the children giggle. The words are rude, aimed at the steward, aimed at the priest, aimed at the Lord. Not shouted, sung softly, as if the flame itself might carry the secret. Laughter is dangerous when you are powerless. That is why it matters. And then, sometimes, things do flare. A tax is raised again at the worst moment. A steward takes more than he is supposed to take. A lord's men insult a woman's husband. A child goes hungry because a sack of grain was seized. Anger gathers. You can feel it like a storm forming far away. The air tastes different. People speak less, but their eyes burn hotter. In the lane, neighbors stand a little closer than usual, not in friendship, but in shared tension. One evening, after the sun has dipped behind the trees and the light turns the mud in the track into black glass, the group meets behind a hut. No banners, no speeches. Just faces half lit by a small lantern, breath fogging in the cold. Someone says, "We cannot pay." Another says, "He will take it anyway." A third says, "Nothing," but clenches his hands until the knuckles whiten. Your heart beats hard. You know the risk. If you go too far, they will hang men in the village square. You have seen gallows in other places. Once, on a pilgrimage, the memory sits in your stomach like sour ale. Still, in that small circle, a thought flickers. What if we say no together? It is a beautiful thought. It is also terrifying, because togetherness is fragile. The village is woven from obligations and family ties, but fear can cut through it quickly. Someone will hesitate. Someone will protect their own children. Someone will betray, not because they are evil, but because they are trying to survive. That is the hardest thing about peasant life. Even when you are angry, you are careful, because carelessness is a luxury. In the end, the revolt in your village does not become a grand story. It becomes a day of refusal. When the steward arrives, expecting sacks of grain and bowed heads, He finds the sacks smaller. He finds faces set. He finds silence. Silence can be a weapon. Not dramatic, not glorious, just heavy. The steward argues. He threatens. He writes. The villagers stand. Then, slowly, the steward leaves. He leaves because he is one man and you are many. And for that moment, the balance shifts just enough that he decides it is safer to return with soldiers later. And when he does return, weeks later, the village has already adjusted. Some people have hidden what they can. Some have fled. Some have made peace. The Lord's men take what they can find. They strike one man to make an example. They drag another away. The village watches. No one rushes forward. Not because no one cares, but because the body knows it cannot fight steel with bare hands and survive. Afterward, the lane is quiet. Quieter than before. People avoid one another's eyes because looking directly at grief feels like inviting it into your own home. The system holds. It almost always holds. And yet, something has changed. Even if it is small, even if it is only inside your own chest, you have felt what it is like to stand together for a moment. You have felt the shape of refusal. It does not overthrow a lord. It does not change the king, but it reminds you that you are not only a pair of hands. You carry that memory the way you carry a scar. It is there. It is yours. Years pass. Children grow. Backs bend. Old faces disappear. The village continues, not because it is happy, but because it is stubborn. I think that is the part history forgets. Not the revolts, not the famous names, the daily endurance, the way a woman bakes bread from almost nothing and still offers a crust to a neighbor, the way a man mends a fence that will break again, and he mends it anyway, the way a family shares a bed, breath mingling, warmth passed from body to body like a quiet mercy. There are years when endurance feels almost ordinary. Then a bad season arrives and the illusion cracks. Rain keeps falling until the fields turn to black glass. Seed rots, the rye comes up thin. You stand at the edge of your plot and do the quiet arithmetic of hunger. How much is left from last year? How much must be saved for seed? How many mouths are in your home now? The numbers do not add up, so you stretch everything. Bread sliced thinner. Bone boiled again and again until it tastes like memory. Children ask, then bargain. Then one day they stop asking, and that silence is heavier than any bell. In famine, people do things they do not name later. Bark mixed into flour, a rat cooked quickly, eaten alone. A missing chicken, and no one looks too closely because everyone understands. Then the famine eases, not with a miracle, but with green returning. The first decent loaf feels almost sacred. You hold it, smell it, eat slowly, letting warmth settle your body like a blessing. You go into the woods when the cupboards are empty. The forest is not romantic when you are hungry. The trees stand close together, bark dark with moisture, and the ground is soft with old leaves that smell of rot and mushrooms. Your boots sink, cold slips through seams. Every branch you push aside leaves wet marks on your sleeves. You look for anything that will not kill you. A handful of acorns that you soak to draw out bitterness. Greens that sting your fingers before they soften in boiling water. Roots you scrape clean with a knife that is too dull, the blade catching, the wood handle warm from your palm. The silence in the forest is its own kind of sound, a distant bird, the slow drip of water from a branch, your own breathing, louder than you want it to be. Every so often you freeze, listening, because bandits are not myths and wolves are not always far away. You carry no sword, you carry only need. When you find something edible, even a small thing, your heart lifts with a sharp, embarrassing hope. You tuck it into your pouch like a secret. You walk home feeling the weight of it, light as it is, and you imagine the pot smelling a little fuller. Back in the hut, the fire is low. Smoke curls in the rafters. The air is thick with damp wool and the sour tang of stored grain. You stir the pot and watch the surface ripple, thin and grey. You watch children stare at the bowl as if staring might thicken it. Hunger changes time. Hours stretch. The sound of chewing becomes loud. The night feels longer. You lie down and your stomach wakes you every few hours with a hollow insistence. And when you drift off, you dream of bread so warm it steams, of meat so tender it pulls apart, of tables you have never seen, and you wake with your mouth dry and your hands clenched. Sometimes illness follows hunger, a cough that rattles the chest, a fever that makes the world shimmer, a swelling in the neck that makes people glance away. No one says the word plague unless they have to. They say bad air, they say God's test, they hang herbs. They press vinegar-soaked cloth to their faces. They pray, then they work, until they cannot. And still, after all of this, the village continues. That is what makes it eerie in its own way. Not ghosts, not curses, but the stubborn fact of life moving forward, even when it is bent and bruised. You endure, you adjust, you find the smallest spaces where you can still choose kindness. And when you wake in the middle hour between sleeps, you remember you do not need to solve the world tonight. Let your shoulders soften, let your jaw unclench, feel the slow rise of your breath, then the slow fall. The fire can be coaxed back to life. Dawn returns until it doesn't. Tonight you are allowed to be still. Good night.